And we're live on match day as Doug reaches for a buffalo wing. He's got it! Oh, and he's gone for a can of Pepsi too! What a finish! There's no doubt about it. It just tastes better. Match days deserve Pepsi.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
This is the Tudors, Dynasty, and Beyond podcast. History with a twist. And now your host, Rebecca Larson.
Hello and welcome back. I'm Rebecca Larson, and I'm so happy to welcome back again Tracy Borman. Welcome.
Oh, Rebecca, thank you for having me back. We've already been kind of enthusing about all things Boleyn, and it's always a joy to be chatting about those Tudors with you.
Yes, well, I had to have you on because your newest historical fiction novel is out, The House of Boleyn, and I just finished reading it yesterday. And
wow,
I told
hot off the press. That's amazing.
I told Tracy, I said, this has been like, I don't know, I sat out on a lake in my kayak, reading this book, just enjoying every word, and of course the nature around me too.
Nobody is going to beat the image that conjures up in my head. That is just amazing. I can't think of a better way of reading a book than like that. I think Anne Boleyn would have approved of that. That's so cool.
I love that. And I am such a huge fan of your fiction. Is it Frances Gorge's?
Yes, exactly. Okay. Yeah, you pronounced it correctly, and not many people do. So yeah, congratulations. And that really means a lot because I feel that fiction is more personal. I guess I put a lot of myself in it. I don't mean literally me. None of the characters are based on me. But writing fiction is just a very personal kind of thing and a journey. And so when somebody says they've enjoyed it, then I am just thrilled to bits. So thank you.
Yeah, it's one of those, it's just your writing style to me is such a page turner. It takes a lot for me to get pulled into a book. Yes. And I immediately knew once this was shipped to me, I was like, this is a no-brainer. I know I'm going to love the way that it's written. And from the moment I opened it, I couldn't stop. I had to stop myself from reading because it was like, what's going to happen? You think it's like you think you know the story, but the story is fiction, historical fiction. So there's some things that are a little bit different than what you'd expect.
Absolutely. And I think that's the challenge with writing a novel about a time period, about a person who's so well known that you still have to make the reader want to turn the page and not necessarily think, but I know what's going to happen. Because actually, I even found myself when I was writing it thinking, I wonder what's going to happen next. And I know, of course, ultimately, probably many of your listeners will know what happens to the Boleyns. But as you say, along the way, there was the potential to weave in some perhaps new and surprising elements to the story.
Oh my gosh, there were so many surprising elements. And I do have to say, of course, you have written a lot of nonfiction. I don't know if you can see over my shoulder here.
Yes.
I have a few of your books that
I was seeing that. And I thought, oh, brilliant. I was like, oh yeah, I can see Crown and Scepter there and Stolen Crown. Thank you very much. Product placement at its finest.
And I would have my Frances Gorge's series trilogy here, but I gave it to a friend because I was like, these are so good, you have to read them. Oh. So I would have those there as well, but I gifted them. So, but I have to ask you. So you've been writing nonfiction for so long. What did fiction allow you to say about the Boleyn family that history books simply can't?
Oh, what a great question. Well, that's the thing. They are so well known, as I said, and this is a story it's been told many, many times. I think Anne Boleyn is by far the most popular of the six wives, a fact that Henry would hate because he tried to kind of airbrush her from history. But in a way, even though this is the most famous courtship in history between Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, we only have a one-sided view of it because only Henry's love letters to Anne survive, or that we know anyway, the 17 love letters that are now intriguingly in the Vatican archives in Rome from Henry to Anne Boleyn. We don't have her replies. And I think, therefore, we know all about Henry's passion. We know far less about whether that was returned by Anne, how she felt about Henry. Was she setting out from the beginning to be queen, or actually was this the last thing she wanted? And so for me, as a historian and a novelist, to be able to sort of inhabit Anne's mind, her heart, for a few years when I was researching and writing this novel was an absolute joy. And I hope I've done her justice, because the fact is, we don't know how Anne really felt. A lot of myth has built up around her. And in her own lifetime, she was known as the great whore and the concubine, and people despised her because they thought Catherine of Aragon was the rightful queen. But they didn't know, and we don't know, whether Anne from the beginning set out for that crown, put a ring on it so that I can be Queen of England. Actually, the evidence I found pointed to the opposite, that she really didn't want this courtship or the marriage, but then ultimately it became inevitable.
Yeah. I have to say, when your book arrived, and of course I saw the title, The House of Boleyn, and saw, I have to hold it up again here, the bee necklace,
Yes.
I immediately thought, and I apologize for saying this, but I'm going to be honest, I immediately thought, oh, another book about Anne Boleyn. And then when I started reading it, I realized it's not another book really about Anne Boleyn. It's about so much more.
Yeah.
And I just have to say, there were so many storylines in this
Yes.
novel and I was like, there were some that shocked me. And I want to know, you went into some of those controversial takes in history and you just dove right into them and brought them into the story. What made you, and I don't want to give up all the details because I want people to read it, but what made you decide to go in that direction this time?
Oh, well, I couldn't resist, to be honest, because there are so many kind of tantalizing what ifs in this story. And you're right. I mean, yes, the Boleyns have been written about a lot. But what I wanted to do with this novel was to create a world, not just tell the story of Anne Boleyn. Of course, she's central to this and what happened with her courtship and then marriage to Henry. But I wanted to immerse the reader in Hever Castle, the Boleyns' beautiful home, and really center the story there so that the action, if you like, stays there. Even when the Boleyns go to court, we're still at Hever. So in order to do that, I had to build a cast of characters that were, more than just Anne and her father and perhaps her sister and brother, but the Boleyn family as a whole, and also then the below stairs, the servants. And this is when I could really have fun, because we know hardly anything about the original household at Hever. There's the name of just one servant who survived in the records, and I actually made him, Robert Cranwell. He was Thomas Boleyn's steward. I made him a terrible villain
Yes,
in this
you
novel,
did.
as you'll know. So I hope the real Cranwell will forgive me for that. We don't know if he was a villain, although there is a bit of a hint of it. And so I really wanted the reader to always have something going on and not feel a sense of loss when, Anne wasn't in the story for a few chapters because she'd gone to court. And so I absolutely loved bringing characters like her grandmother, Lady Margaret, into the frame, as well as her supposedly wicked sister-in-law, Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, who I don't think was wicked at all. I didn't find any evidence for that. And so hopefully the reader is left sort of feeling like they've lived with the Boleyns for a while, because that's how I felt. And, as I say, it was just an endless journey of discovery for me. And obviously it was pretty cool to spend a lot of time at Hever Castle as well. It's an amazing place.
Oh, I bet. I'm glad that you brought up the servants because that was really one of my favorite parts of this story. And
Oh, good.
I fell in love with Esther. So can you explain to everybody who Esther is in your story?
I did too. So I'm so pleased that that you're a fellow fan of Esther. So in my novel, Esther is the sort of lady's maid to Anne and to her sister Mary, but she forges a very, very close bond with Anne Boleyn. And I did a lot of research into sort of masters and servants in Tudor times and found that it was a much closer relationship than that between servants and those they attended in later centuries. You know, I'm thinking of the Victorian period when servants were seen but not heard. It was a very deferential relationship. Whereas in Tudor times, servants were confidants, they were companions, they would share the secrets of their master or mistress. And so I wanted this close relationship between Anne and Esther. And it also enabled me to really get into Anne's state of mind, her hopes and desires, because she's confiding those to Esther. But then Esther goes on her own journey, and it's one that is ultimately, you know, fraught with tragedy. There's some pretty horrific things happen to Esther, and I really wanted the reader to be as invested in her as they were in the more famous woman who she served.
I was definitely more invested in her because there was the scene, right? Let's just say where Esther disappears.
Yes.
And I remember I was like heartbroken. I was like, whoa, what just happened?
I know exactly. And I was like, oh, do I write this? I think I'm going to have to write it. But then, we had, that was definitely a big plot line in the novel. But I can tell you though, Rebecca, when I first finished the first draft of the House of Boleyn, it was twice as long. And there were twice as many plot lines and characters. And then my editor was like, yeah, we kind of gave you a word limit for a reason, you know. So there's kind of probably another book on the cutting room floor, you know, that I had to take out, and it was quite painful. But I think actually it works much better as, you know, there's a lot going on, but it is quite, you know, tightly focused. It's packed in.
Yes, but it's just so good. You guys, seriously, I cannot, I feel like every time I talk to you, I'm just raving about your writing, but it's such a page turner and it's so enjoyable. And you brought up Margaret, Thomas Boleyn's mother, and that is really a figure from history that I knew her name, and that was pretty much it. And you just brought her to life, I think, for the reader.
Great, because I think if we'd been around in the sort of early 1500s and up to, you know, the kind of denouement of Anne's story, everybody would have known Lady Margaret Boleyn. Everybody would have been talking about her. She was a woman of influence and wealth in Tudor England. So she was an Irish noblewoman. And not many people know that Boleyns had this Irish ancestry, and it's fascinating because so Anne Boleyn's grandmother, William Boleyn, his father decided, look, the Boleyns need a bit of aristocracy. You know, people still see them as new money, trade. So he decided to marry his son William into this very, very distinguished Irish noble family. And so Margaret was the one who brought the kudos and the pedigree to the Boleyns and really kind of bumped them up the social scale. And I think she was a quite formidable figure and would have been a real influence on Anne growing up. But then again, no spoilers, but as you know, something happens to Margaret. A lot happens in this novel. And it's a sudden kind of what that takes place in 1519. And it's real. It was in the records. And I remember having just this heart-stopping moment when I read what happened to Margaret. And what happened was so unexplained, and therefore I came up with a theory. And I'm very honest in my author's note that we don't know the true story of why this thing happened to Margaret. I do think, as a historian, I feel a responsibility to do quite a detailed author's note at the end of a novel, just to say, look, This is the stuff I've made up. This is the real history. And I personally love reading an author's note at the end of a historical novel. So hopefully readers will feel the same.
Yeah, I loved the personality that you gave her. You know, she was definitely the matriarch of that family, and it seemed like everybody gravitated toward her, but so did Danger. And that's all I'm going to say, right?
Indeed. Oh, you're so good at the little tantalizing bits of information. And she was, so I don't know if you guys have Downton Abbey over there. Do you watch?
Of course, yes.
Oh, good. Because for me, I had in mind when I was writing Lady Margaret, I had Maggie Smith's character of Lady Grantham. That's who it was for me, the kind of matriarch of the Boleyn family. And so, yeah, she was a real inspiration for me.
I love that. I liked how it kind of tied to her storyline was Blickling. And,
yes.
And that's something that we hear, of course, when it comes to Anne Boleyn. Why was it important for you to draw that into this story?
Yeah, so this was a slight passion project of mine because my very, very first book was about a Georgian mistress, Henrietta Howard. She was the long-term, long-suffering mistress of King George II. And Henrietta was raised at Blickling Hall. So I knew Blickling from researching that biography, and I knew how beautiful it was. And then later I found the association with the Boleyns, and that Anne Boleyn was born at Blickling, almost certainly, rather than at Hever. And so it meant something to me. And I just thought, I'm not sure how aware people are of this strong connection between the Boleyns and Norfolk, the kind of east of England. And so I wanted to bring that out through Blickling. But yeah, that was a bit of bias on my part because I know how stunning it is there. And I spent so much time there. And I thought I can't resist just writing that in a little bit.
Okay, so I have to ask you then. So in the story, you have Thomas Boleyn's brother James residing there. And there's a point where I don't remember if it's James or his wife Bess talk about how large Blickling is compared to Hever. Was that a personal thing? Did you pull that from your own personal opinion?
Yeah. Yes, it was, because that's the thing. The Boleyns, even in Thomas Boleyn's day when he was head of the family, so Anne's father, they started out their married life, Thomas and Elizabeth, at Blickling, because it was the bigger house of the two Boleyn properties, Blickling and Hever. Blickling had it all. I mean, Hever would probably fit in a stable at Blickling, but it's all about location. And so when Thomas Boleyn starts to get big at Henry VIII's court and he's sent on lots of diplomatic missions, this is when Hever becomes the more sensible property for the Boleyns to make their main base, because Thomas is forever travelling between the court in London and the coast, and Hever lies very conveniently between the two. And so, you know, whereas Norfolk is a long way from the court, it's a long way from the port of Dover. And so it's all about location. So they chose the smaller property, but it was much handier. And so from about 1505, that's when Hever became the main residence for the Boleyns.
And I have to say, James and his wife, Bess, are two people from the book that I just wanted to strangle.
Yeah. I know. I may have put a former boss of mine in that character. I'm saying no more than that, but yeah, it was quite satisfying.
I like that. I always know when it comes to fiction, there is some inspiration from people's personal lives that they pull into it. It's what they're willing to admit.
Yes.
The connections.
Yes. 100%. You know, you can't help but do that sometimes. So yeah, it's so true though. I've heard other novelists say it's way more fun writing villains than heroes, and it's true. Honestly, you can get out a load of stuff, a load of frustration in writing villains. So I loved it. Yeah.
It sounds like it's a good therapy session.
You know, it is. It's quite cathartic. And another great one, of course, and I didn't have to make this up, was the Duke of Norfolk, Anne Boleyn's uncle. Talk about a wicked uncle.
Yeah.
He's just a horrible person, I think, genuinely. Like, even Henry VIII doesn't like him, but he kind of keeps him close because he's this distinguished nobleman. But you just have to see that portrait of Norfolk, the famous one, and he just looks like a nasty piece of work. So there wasn't much fiction around Norfolk. I just had to kind of write it as it was.
Yeah, he is one of those despicable characters from Tudor history where there's nothing redeemable about him.
Like his family are just collateral damage in his rise to the top. So yes, he wants Anne Boleyn to be queen. So he doesn't care whether she wants it or not. He's kind of pushing her forward. And then when, of course, the fall begins of Anne and things are going badly wrong, then he just jumps ship and he's part of the trial, a big part of the trial that condemns his own niece, and then moves on to another of his nieces with Catherine Howard and puts her in the king's path, and that goes disastrously wrong. He just seems like the most despicable person in the Tudor court, and there were one or two of those.
Led by Henry VIII, of course.
Yeah. I didn't like to say because he's just over your shoulder there, but yeah, he's the kind of ultimate, I think, of the despicable ones.
He's watching you, Tracy. You better watch it.
I know. Yeah, I know. I fear for my neck.
I have to know, were there scenes in this book that you desperately wanted to write, but you couldn't justify writing them historically?
Yeah, definitely. Oh gosh, where to begin? Well, one that I did sneak in, I must admit, was Henry VIII coming to Hever to sort of pursue Anne. We don't know if he ever did actually set foot across the threshold of Hever Castle, but I put him there. But there were other scenes that we know absolutely happened at court, and quite tragic scenes, such as at least two of the three miscarriages that Anne suffered, as well as Henry's kind of growing interest in Jane Seymour. That all takes place at court, and I did manage to bring a couple of scenes to Hever, because my mantra was, we have to stay at Hever. But otherwise, there were things that I knew were kind of happening offset, if you like. So in this novel, there's a sense of, and I think and I hope it ramps up the drama towards the end, but there's a sense of kind of waiting for news. Like the household know that stuff is going on and things are starting to unravel. But this isn't the age of just being able to send a quick message or, text somebody or whatever. They have to wait days to find out what's going on in London. And the tension becomes almost unbearable towards the end when it's obvious that things are going very, very badly wrong. So, yeah, it was, I had to really put myself in the mindset of Esther and the other loyal servants who were all there at Hever, just waiting desperate for news.
Yeah, they're sitting at Hever, desperate for news. They don't necessarily want to go into town to go to the markets to buy food because they know we learn throughout the story, people are gossiping and spreading rumors, whether they're true or not. And so they're like trying to keep themselves away from that. But yeah, like you said, so desperate to find out news. And then when you have Jane Boleyn ride to Hever with the news of what has happened, I was like, that Jane for me was such a poignant character. And as I say, I really hope I've rescued her even a little bit, because she's been so unjustly vilified by history. And in every screen portrayal, she is the villain, even in my beloved Wolf Hall, which I absolutely adore. But Lady Rochford is quite a horrible character in that. You don't really warm to her. And really, it all begins with this fiction that she's the one who betrays her husband, George Boleyn, and her sister-in-law, Anne. She's the one who effectively sends them to their deaths. We don't know that. In fact, what we have is evidence that Jane is trying to plead for them. She's trying to persuade Henry to let her see her husband when he's arrested and taken to the Tower, and to pardon him. And yet she's been made a scapegoat. And I think really that started in the reign of Anne's daughter, Elizabeth, where it's almost like Elizabeth couldn't blame her father for what happened to her mother. She can't criticize Henry VIII. So she needs a scapegoat. And this is when we get this whole fiction around Jane Boleyn. So it was really important to me to try to rehabilitate her a little bit. And it's,
I think there was tragedy to Jane's story. It's not just that she was kind of out for herself.
For sure. Okay, this is part of the story that I'm going to give up, and I apologize because I just want to talk about it.
Yes,
Was the fact that you gave Jane Boleyn and George a child.
I did. I did. And I don't think that's too much of a spoiler because there is just a little hint in the records that suggests there may have been a child. So there was a churchman in Lichfield, and I do actually mention Lichfield towards the end. Can I give a little hint of this? George Boleyn, who there is a theory, and the dates would kind of work for him to have been Jane Boleyn's son by her husband George. Eldest sons or sons tended to be named for their father, so it's possible. You know, the evidence is just completely lacking, really, apart from the name. And we know that he was known to Elizabeth, so he was quite prominent. It's possible, and I definitely kind of constructed a storyline around that. And you know, it's not completely flying in the face of the evidence. There is, as I say, just that tantalizing possibility that this George Boleyn, who was around in the reign of Elizabeth, really was the son of Jane. So, of course, why would Jane give him up? Well, that's where I let my imagination run wild, and that this is her kind of great sacrifice when she realizes things are going wrong. She doesn't want her son to be tainted by it, so sends him away, and so that's a real. Oh, for me, it was quite heartrending, that part of the book. But yeah, that was one I just couldn't resist. If there's just a little crack of light shining through that story, I was going to push open that door.
I'm so glad that you did. It made me so happy to be able to see Jane as a mother and as a doting mother and doing whatever she could to keep her child safe and happy. And I'm so glad you went in that direction.
Oh, I'm so pleased because, so often, as I say, she's the villain. And also it's shown as a loveless marriage. And that, you know, George is just either George is gay or he's cheating on her in some way with the other women of court. And that's based solely on the fact that we don't know for sure if they had children. So the supposition is, therefore, it's a miserable marriage. Whereas there's any number of reasons why people don't have children. And so assumptions have been made. So, hopefully a bit of setting the record straight has happened.
Is there a particular storyline in the book that you enjoyed writing the most?
Oh, where to begin? Well, apart from I loved the Margaret storyline, actually, and the drama around that. I really enjoyed, and I'm going to choose my words carefully here because I really don't want to give this away. But so when I said towards the beginning of our chat about we don't know how Anne felt towards Henry, and whether, in fact, her heart was his or somebody else's. That sort of latter bit of my sentence is something that I very much explored and enjoyed exploring. This idea that actually Anne was already spoken for. She loved somebody other than Henry. And that was really behind her actions in constantly trying to get away from Henry and keep going back to Hever, because perhaps there was somebody closer to home, should we say, who she loved. And that storyline, I was going to say it wrote itself. You know, it just felt so natural to me. And again, there's more than a hint in the records that this actually was true. And so I loved following that particular scenario. Of course, you know, it's going to end in tears ultimately, but it was a really poignant one for me.
I so desperately want to say what it was, but I'm not going to because I loved it. It surprised me, but I absolutely loved that you added that in there because I think we all just wanted Anne to be happy, right? We wanted her to have it.
Yes, and again, I think there is a happy ending of sorts in this, and it was important to me. And I think, and we know that this, you know, ultimately the Boleyn's story did not end on that bloody scaffold at the Tower in May 1536. They had the most incredible legacy, and it was a legacy that most immediately lived on through Anne's daughter Elizabeth, my all-time favourite monarch in British history, who defied all the odds to become queen in the first place and then absolutely smashed it. You know, she refused to marry, longest reigning, most successful Tudor, and the triumph of her mother, really, if only Anne had lived to see the day. And then the Boleyn story continues. And this is what really surprised me and surprises most people I talk to, is that while Henry VIII's line died out with Elizabeth in 1603, the Boleyn line carried on through Mary Boleyn, Anne's sister. Her bloodline continued, and our current king, Charles III, is a direct descendant of Mary Boleyn. And his son William, our future king, is a Boleyn twice over, because his mother, Princess Diana, was also a direct descendant of Mary Boleyn. So I kind of love that. It's like the Boleyns have the last laugh over Henry.
They do. Well, now that you brought up Mary, now I have to talk about Mary, because I'm very curious why you chose that direction with her. And I feel like that's all I want to say.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Marvel Television's Wonder Man, an 8-episode series, now streaming on Disney+.
A superhero remake, not exactly what we'd expect from an Oscar-winning director.
Action! Simon Williams, audition for Wonder Man.
I'm gonna need you to sign this, assuming you don't have superpowers.
I'll never work again if anyone found out.
My lips are sealed.
Marvel Television's Wonder Man. All 8 episodes now streaming, only on Disney+.
Yes, so Mary was fascinating to research. Again, many myths have sprung up around Mary, or assumptions have been made. So, you know, famously, she was the mistress of 2 kings. She was the mistress of Francis I in France, where she and Anne, her sister, spent several years at the court, and then kind of returns to England with a slightly tarnished reputation. Gets herself a job, or her father gets her a job at Henry VIII's court, serving Catherine of Aragon. Then she becomes Henry VIII's mistress. Well, we know that last scenario is true. You know, that there is pretty firm evidence that Mary Boleyn did have an affair with Henry VIII. But there's hardly any evidence that she was the French king's mistress as well. That's just been put about by a sort of later source. So she's been kind of unjustly cast in this role of kind of seductress and loose woman. And she certainly had an affair with Henry. And I go with the scenario that her firstborn child, Catherine, was Henry's. And Catherine Carey, as she was, because Mary Boleyn married William Carey, the courtier, who obviously kind of claimed the daughter as his. Catherine's conception does match when Mary was having an affair with Henry, should we say. And if you look at portraits of Catherine Carey, I would say there's a bit of a resemblance with old Henry there. So that's definitely a line I followed. But then, yes, Mary, she has a kind of prelude in my book, should we say, a sort of a liaison that's with neither king, but that does cause her some difficulties and some tragedy ultimately.
Yes.
So I wanted to explore more about Mary's backstory and not just cast her as this typical, mistress to 2 kings. There's more to Mary than that. And I hope I've done some justice to her story.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. One of the other things that I really enjoyed was kind of getting inside the head of Anne Boleyn. I feel like there were moments in the book where you were like listening to what she was saying to herself in her head and how she was planning things and trying to figure out how things work. And I found that, I don't know that I've ever felt that close to Anne Boleyn as I did in those moments.
Oh, wow. That's huge praise. Thank you so much. Because, yeah, what a daunting thing to try to inhabit Anne's mind and what is making her tick. And I've presented the reader with my take on it. It could be argued the other way. You could see her as cold and calculating and out for the throne from the very beginning. The evidence led me in a different direction, and one where she has ambitions, certainly, but she doesn't want to be the wife of Henry VIII. And I think Anne was so influenced by the years she spent in France. And this for me was pivotal to her kind of character development, because in France, she became interested in religious reform, the position of women in society. She was reading quite radical books about how women should have power, not just men. And this really kind of shaped Anne into this woman who was unlike any other in Henry's court. And I really wanted to bring that through. Her intelligence, her ambition, and her vision. I think that's one of the reasons she's so popular today. Is she's very relatable. She's not prepared to be a typical woman in the 16th century who is a second-class citizen and regarded as inferior, and their lives are dictated by the men in their own lives. And for Anne, she wants more than that. And so that's really what I wanted to give emphasis to in creating her character. And I have to say, I had an absolute riot just inhabiting Anne Boleyn for a few years, writing this book. She's somebody I've always admired, but I've also found a little bit scary at times. But I think Elizabeth was definitely her mother's daughter, put it like that.
Yeah. I also love how you explored the relationship between Thomas Boleyn and his daughter Anne.
Oh, yeah.
And the closeness that they have. I feel like, I don't know, like everybody, well, I shouldn't say everybody, but most people have two parents. Yes. And if you have a mother and a father, and you tend to gravitate more toward one or the other. I was always much closer with my father. And so I understood that storyline of the closeness between Thomas and Anne. And it's so sweet to read, but then it's also so tragic when you get to the end too.
I know. I'm really pleased that resonated with you because, again, a lot of misrepresentation has come forward about Thomas Boleyn in that he tends to be cast as the scheming, ambitious courtier who pushes his daughter forward so that he can gain from this. And actually, again, the evidence led me in a different direction. And it seems very, very obvious to me. Thomas does not want this marriage to happen any more than Anne does. And actually what he's trying to do is to keep bringing Anne back to Hever, not to kind of play a game with Henry, to make him, driven mad with frustrated desire, but genuinely because he wants to protect Anne. He wants to keep her safe at Hever. He knows how dangerous Henry is. And he's also seen one daughter, cross Henry's path with not great results. He doesn't want that to happen to another, to Anne, who seems to me to have been his favourite. He's very, very proud of Anne. We know he invested a lot in her education and her upbringing and proudly described her as being very toward, very forward. So he wants more for Anne than this. And I think that's genuine. And it's certainly how I presented it in this book. And I wanted that closeness, that sort of father-daughter bond to really come through. So thank you for saying it did for you, because it felt true for me as I was researching this.
Yeah, I loved it. I always tell people I lost my dad in September, and I always say, sometimes you just have that person in your life who sees you for you. Yes. Without judgment. And that was my dad for me. Yeah. And I feel like that was Thomas Boleyn and Anne in this story, at least.
Completely. And I'm so sorry that for your loss. And I can really, so my dad passed away 3 weeks ago, and actually on Anne Boleyn's anniversary. So, and I was very close. And so, and when you have that bond, I think that's why I was kind of writing from the heart with this book. It really meant a lot. So I think those of us who have been fortunate to have amazing fathers, I was able to put a lot of my own relationship into this book.
Oh, I'm so sorry about the loss of your father too. I feel like once you lose a father, and I think in particular when you are a daughter, and you lose your father. I said at my dad's funeral, I did the eulogy.
Oh,
And I just felt like I had to, and I knew that's
yes.
kind of what he would have wanted for me. And I opened with, your father is the first man you'll ever love.
Oh,
And isn't that, I mean, it really is the
that's so
truth.
true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
That is what a beautiful way to start a eulogy. And that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
The first and arguably the most important man in your life who you will love is your father.
Yes.
And you know, I really wanted to bring that across because I did see a lot of evidence for the closeness between Anne and her father. And it's kind of made me frustrated over the years, just reading how they're just cold and they're calculating and all that. That's not how it appears to me. It appears like a really tight-knit, affectionate family, and particularly that relationship between Anne and her father.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's talk about the relationship between Anne and her daughter Elizabeth, because I know this is one that you have studied a lot. And how do you think, and Elizabeth not really getting to know her mother because she was so young when her mother died. How do you think that affected her and maybe her personality as she grew up?
Yeah, I think it had a huge effect. Of course, I would say this because I've written a book about it. But one of my favorite books to research was Anne Boleyn and Elizabeth I, because I started out not knowing if there was going to be enough to write about, because I've always been fascinated in what did Elizabeth think to her mother. She's often misquoted as saying, that she only refers to her mother twice in her long life. Well, in fact, it is a bit more than that, but she's always talking about her father, and she's much more discreet about her mother. And I sort of had a hunch that for Elizabeth, she's being cautious because Elizabeth knows when she comes to the throne, her mother is still scandalous. And half of her subjects see her as illegitimate because of what happened with her mother, and that Anne was condemned for adultery and treason. Her marriage to Henry was annulled, so Elizabeth was declared a bastard. And Elizabeth had to be cautious in talking about her mother in those early years of her reign because, she knew her position on the throne was pretty shaky. But for her, it was actions more than words. And oh, what a joy it was to just find out more and more things kept coming to light about how Elizabeth tried to honour her late mother. She surrounded herself with Boleyns. It was almost impossible to get a job at Elizabeth's court unless you were related to Anne Boleyn. So you get the Careys there and the Knollys and the Sackvilles, all these Boleyn kins and relatives that come forward during Elizabeth's reign. And then as her reign progresses, you see her confidence grow because she's more secure on her throne, and she starts to celebrate her mother more openly in portraits, in displaying Anne's emblems. You see the white falcon everywhere, and she goes to Norfolk on a progress and sort of honours her mother's sort of homeland, if you like. There's so much there. There's so much richness, and you sense that Anne Boleyn means a huge amount to Elizabeth, even though Elizabeth was 2 years and 8 months old when Anne was executed. So she could have had precious few actual memories of her. But she clearly felt this connection. And probably for me, the memento that Elizabeth had that speaks the loudest is that exquisite Chequers ring, as it's known, this little locket ring that's now at Chequers House, which is our Prime Minister's country house. And it's in the collection there. And it's a locket ring that opens to reveal tiny portraits, one of Anne Boleyn and the other of Elizabeth. And Elizabeth owned this ring from the sort of 1570s. And on the outside, it just has an E in diamonds. And she would have known what was inside and that her mother was in there. And that when it was closed, those two portraits, mother and daughter, kind of touched. And she kept that ring with her until the day she died.
It's like her mom was a part of her and it was a secret almost.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. She knew that it would be danger to herself to celebrate her mother too openly, but she certainly found her way to do that.
I know I've told you this before. I'm not a huge fan of Elizabeth, but I do feel for her in that respect that she lost her mother so early and then had to kind of keep her under the rug a little bit.
Well, she did, and she lost her mother, but then it got worse. She was pretty much banished by her father, not really welcome at court, had a succession of stepmothers. Luckily for Elizabeth, at least two of those were wonderful stepmothers, Anne of Cleves, who may have introduced Elizabeth to Hever Castle, her mother's home, because Anne of Cleves actually inherited Hever Castle. And Elizabeth was close to her, so may have visited her there. And then, of course, her last stepmother, Catherine Parr. Yeah. And Catherine Parr introduced her to books that Anne Boleyn used to love. So there was always this connection growing up for Elizabeth with her mother. But what a turbulent childhood and youth, and ending up in the Tower and almost executed. And yeah, she had to learn the hard way what it took to survive.
Yeah, I do like how you added that after the story in the book about Anne of Cleves inviting Elizabeth and Elizabeth going through the house and finding things that belonged to her mother. That was very heartwarming.
Oh, good. Because it's one of those if only moments, if Anne had lived to see her daughter a queen, and it's not something she could have imagined. There's that wonderful film, Anne of a Thousand Days, a real classic film where the Genevieve Bujold, who plays Anne, sort of says, "Oh, my Elizabeth will be queen one day." And I think that's a bit too much dramatic license, because Anne Boleyn, at the time of her death, absolutely wouldn't have thought her daughter was going to be queen, because she'd just been declared a bastard, and there was another daughter ahead of her in the line of succession. But if only Anne had known how it would turn out.
If only, for sure. Okay, so I think maybe the last question that I have for you is, if you could recover one lost letter from the Boleyn archives, who would have written it and who would have received it?
Oh gosh, the choice. Okay, one springs instantly to mind. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we have pretty much all of Henry VIII's love letters to Anne and none of her replies. So this would be a letter from Anne to Henry, written precisely around Christmas 1526, because at that time Henry VIII sent a letter to Hever where Anne was celebrating Christmas with her family. And in this letter, for the first time, he talked of marriage. And he said to Anne, "I want to marry you." And we don't know what she replied. I really, really want to know what was in the letter that she sent back. So that would have to be the one that was top of my list.
Oh, I think we all hope that these letters from her to him will just show up someday.
Yeah, you never know. I keep looking. I keep checking the attics at Hampton Court. I promise.
They're here somewhere. I swear it.
Yeah.
Oh, Tracy, I have absolutely loved this book, The House of Boleyn. It's out now in the UK, right?
It's out now in the UK and in the US on the 4th of August. So only a couple of months to go.
Yes. And you guys, seriously, I can't recommend it enough. I think I've been gushing over the way you write historical fiction for this whole interview. But really, if you love Tudor history, if you love Anne Boleyn, if you love to learn about the stories of other people involved in these households, I can't recommend this book enough. It's a page turner and you're not going to regret it. So I highly recommend that you pick up this book.
Oh, thank you so much. Honestly, it means such a lot. Because I know, somebody in your position with all your knowledge and all the Tudor-ness that you have absorbed over the years, to hear that you enjoyed the book so much really means a huge amount. I now want to buy myself a kind of kayak and get a lake and just read whatever book I'm reading next in that kind of scenario, as opposed to in cold, rainy London, which is where I currently am.
Well, the next time I'm out reading on a lake in my kayak, I'll be thinking of you. It's not the same, I know, but
yeah, okay, it helps.
Well, Tracy, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to put links in the show notes for this book for people to buy or pre-order. I'll also put links to all of your other books that you can not all of them, but most of the ones that you can see over my shoulder here in the video. But Thank you so much for joining me again today.
Oh, thanks for having me back. It's been an absolute joy.
And that concludes another episode of the Tudors Dynasty and Beyond podcast. This podcast would not be possible without the wonderful support of my generous Patreon patrons. If you'd like to become a patron, you get commercial-free episodes, early access, and exclusive content. Head over to Patreon, that's patreon.com/Tudors Dynasty for more information. Until next.
Meet the new iSims, the single talent acquisition platform that's fully future-ready. It works wherever and however you hire, with insights no one else offers. One solution that fits seamlessly into your existing tech stack, which is why IT and HR leaders trust it. With the best of enterprise-grade software and AI, iSims helps you identify and secure the right talent faster. iSims, powering exceptional hiring. Learn more at isims.com.
Have no fear, Chosen Foods is here to defend your favorite foods from the forces of seedy oils and sketchy ingredients. With cooking oils, salad dressings, and mayo, all powered by the good fats from 100% pure avocado oil and simple, delicious ingredients. Chosen Foods.
Next time.